The wind came in dry and restless that night, tugging at the brittle grass and rattling the bare branches of a weathered cottonwood beside the pond. The sky was a deep, heavy purple, bruised with the promise of rain but too stubborn to let loose. Out here, on the edge of nowhere, nights like this carried a weight, pressing down on the bones and the mind alike. The town of Dry Fork lay a half-day's ride east, and the dying frontier stretched beyond, all dust and rock and secrets meant to stay buried. Elias Boone stood by the water's edge, the reflection of the darkening sky flickering across the pond's rippled surface. The ducks were restless, their quiet quacking breaking the hush of the oncoming storm. Boone didn't speak to them, but they seemed to know him well enough, content to drift in lazy circles until nightfall. He wore a battered hat low over his brow, a worn coat clinging to his shoulders like a second, tired skin. His face was a map of old lines, sun-scoured and scarred, eyes like burned-out coals. The years had done their work on him, hollowing him out, leaving only the parts too stubborn to quit. A sudden rustle came from the brush near the coop. He didn't move. Not at first. Out here, you learn to listen before acting. The wind played tricks, and night creatures moved low to the ground. But this sound was different, softer, cautious, and human. Boone's hand slid to the handle of the old Henry rifle leaning against the split-rail fence. He waited. A small figure crept toward the duck's nesting spot, barefoot, hair hanging in wild tangles, skin smeared with dirt and dust. It was a girl, slight and rail-thin, barely more than a shadow against the dusk. She reached a trembling hand toward one of the nests, closing her dirty fingers around a still warm egg. The ducks hissed in protest. Boone stepped forward. The girl spun, wide hollow eyes catching the last light, like a trapped animal. She froze, a twig snapping under her foot. He saw the way she tensed, as though expecting a blow or a bullet. Her chest rose and fell with ragged breaths, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. He could see the desperation clinging to her like the grime on her skin, the kind of hunger that lived in the bones. Out here, folks didn't last long without a name, and this one had the look of someone the world had already tried to forget. "You hungry, girl?" Boone asked, voice low and graveled. The girl didn't answer. She held the egg close to her chest, like it was some precious gem, fingers trembling so hard she might crush it. He raised a hand, palm out. "Ain't gonna hurt you." The wind picked up then, carrying the scent of distant rain and something older, dust, decay, and dry sage. Boone took a step closer, slow and deliberate. The girl flinched, backing toward the fence, feet leaving faint prints in the dirt. "Come on," Boone said. "Ain't right you out in this weather." He gestured toward the house. A single light glowed in the kitchen window. The girl's gaze darted from the rifle to the house to the dark horizon behind her, like weighing whether to run for it or follow him. She looked too exhausted for either. A crack of distant thunder rolled across the plain. Without a word, she followed. Inside, the house was plain and quiet, a place where every object had a purpose and every surface showed its age. The kitchen smelled of wood smoke and old coffee. Boone stoked the coals in the stove and fetched a tin plate, laying out the last of a cold biscuit and a strip of cured meat. He poured water from a jug into a battered cup. The girl hesitated at the door, dirt-streaked and silent. "Sit," he told her. She did, moving like a spooked colt, wary and ready to bolt. Boone set the plate in front of her and stepped back. She eyed it like it might be a trap, then tore into the food with frantic, gulping bites. He didn't speak, just watched, the storm's first drops tapping against the window glass. When she slowed, licking crumbs from her fingers, Boone poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from her. The lamp's glow caught the hollow places in her face, the sharp lines of cheekbone and collarbone. She couldn't have been more than 12, maybe younger. "What's your name?" he asked. She stared down at the empty plate. "Girls gotta have a name," he said. "Folks'll call you what they want otherwise." She shook her head. He wasn't sure if it meant no name or no answer. Boone leaned back in his chair, the wood creaking beneath him. The storm outside thickened, rain coming in steady now, drumming against the roof. The hound by the hearth lifted his head, then settled back down with a sigh. After a long while, Boone rose and fetched a thin wool blanket from a trunk in the corner. He tossed it across the table. The girl caught it, clutched it to herself, eyes wary. "Sadie," he said quietly. "You look like a Sadie." She didn't protest. The name hung in the room like something delicate and half forgotten. She pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders. "You can sleep in the loft," he said. "Storm will break by morning." The girl nodded once. He didn't expect thanks, and none came. Boone drained the rest of his coffee and banked the fire. In the flickering light, the hard planes of his face softened just a little. For the first time in years, the house didn't feel quite so empty. Outside, the wind howled, and the rain kept falling. The morning broke in sullen gray, with the storm's memory still clinging to the earth in damp patches. The wind had calmed, but the air hung thick with the smell of wet dirt and wood smoke. Boone was already outside, splitting kindling beside the coop, when Sadie appeared in the doorway. She stood barefoot, clutching the frayed blanket around her shoulders like armor, her tangled hair falling into her hollow eyes. He didn't greet her, just gestured toward a stack of uncut wood and the small hand axe leaning against it. She hesitated, uncertain. "Best way to earn your keep out here," Boone said without looking up. "Ain't nobody gets a free ride." Sadie approached, eyeing the axe like it might turn on her. Boone watched out of the corner of his eye as she picked it up, held it wrong, then tried to mimic his movements. The first piece of kindling barely splintered. She tried again. "You'll figure it," Boone muttered, going back to his work. They settled into a rhythm of silence, broken only by the sharp crack of splitting wood and the low cluck of ducks by the pond. Boone caught her stealing glances at him now and again, as if measuring the space between them. It was more peace than she'd known in years, and neither of them needed to say so. Later, while they gathered eggs, Sadie's voice came halting, raw from disuse. "I was 8, I think," she said, not meeting his gaze. When my ma and pa died." Boone said nothing, waiting. "Came home from town one day. House was burnt down. Nothing left but the chimneys. Pa'd stayed back to fix the fence. Ma too sick to ride. I found 'em both." Her hand shook as she gathered an egg into the basket. Didn't even know who'd done it. Folks didn't care much to ask. Boone's jaw clenched. He'd seen too much of that kind of thing out here. Death without witness, without justice. The land devoured the weak and slow, and the law was as crooked as the men who claimed it. "Been on my own since," Sadie finished, voice barely a whisper. "Would not have made it through last winter, but a trapper up in the ridge left his snares behind. Took what I could." Boone grunted, neither kind nor cruel. "World's full of wolves, girl. Some two-legged." Sadie looked up at him then, and for the first time, Boone thought he saw something in her besides hunger. A flicker of stubbornness, maybe even the makings of a survivor. "Name's Sadie now," she said quietly, like testing it out. Boone let the ghost of a nod pass between them. "Better keep moving. Got town business come midday." They hitched up the old mule and rattled down the hard-packed trail toward Dry Fork by noon. The town lay in a shallow basin of sun-bleached rock and dust, its crooked buildings leaning against the wind like old men too proud to fall. The only greenery clung to the edges of a muddy stream that barely trickled anymore. As they entered, Boone felt a shift in the air. Eyes behind curtains, faces that turned away too quick. The streets were near empty, save for a pair of Crowder's men lounging by the saloon, rifles slung careless over their shoulders. Mason Crowder had ruled Dry Fork going on 5 years, a mean-eyed bastard with a laugh like breaking glass and a taste for power. He'd come with a gang of 30 and whittled the law down to nothing, buying off the weak and burying the defiant. The last honest sheriff hung from the cottonwood outside town, his bones picked clean by buzzards. Boone kept to himself. Folks remembered his name in whispers, stories of a soldier turned scout, a killer for Union pay in the war, and a man you didn't cross twice. Some called him Devil Boone behind his back. He didn't correct them. At the market square, Boone traded a brace of duck eggs and a jar of dried herbs for flour and salt. Sadie stayed close, eyes wary, flinching at every loud voice. Boone was about to head out when the shouting started. A man was dragged from the boarding house by 2 of Crowder's men, his face bloodied, shirt ripped open. The townsfolk gathered in ones and twos, drawn by the inevitable cruelty. Boone recognized the man, Eli Harper, a wiry trapper who drank too much but never caused harm. He was shouting about stolen pelts and unfair taxes. Some folks, one of Crowder's men, sneered, "Forget who keeps this town from going up in flames." Mason Crowder stepped out of a saloon then, a long, lean figure in a dark coat, silver star badge, shining like mockery. His face was handsome in a mean way, hair oiled back, a snake's grin spread thin. "Morning, neighbors," Crowder called, tipping his hat. "Seems we got us a man forgot his place." Harper struggled, blood at the corner of his mouth. "Ain't no law left in this hole, Crowder. You're nothing but a—" The whip cracked before he finished. A long lash, wielded by one of the men, cut across Harper's back, leaving a red welt. Sadie flinched beside Boone. Crowder's smile widened. Always room for one more on that tree. Boone's lip curled in disgust. His fingers itched toward the butt of his rifle, but stayed put. Not yet. He felt Sadie's hand brush his sleeve. The girl's face was tight, jaw clenched, but she didn't look away. Crowder's gaze swept the crowd, landed briefly on Boone, then moved on. He was careful about Boone, always had been. Knew enough old stories to stay clear. "String him up," Crowder ordered, and turned back toward the saloon. The crowd dispersed as the poor man was hauled away. No one spoke. No one ever did. On the ride back, the sun lowering in the west, Sadie broke the silence. "Why don't you stop him?" she asked. Boone stared ahead, the dust rising from the mule's hooves. "Used to be," he said, voice low. "I was worse than them." Sadie didn't reply. Neither did Boone. But something between them had shifted. The nights had grown colder, the air sharpening with the promise of coming frost. Each dawn arrived brittle and gray, and the land stretched out in every direction like a forgotten graveyard. Boone moved through his days as he always had, tending the ducks, cutting wood, mending what could be mended. But the girl's presence gnawed at him like an old splinter buried too deep to pull free. Sadie had taken to following the old hound around the yard, the two of them forming an odd, quiet pair. The dog, a scarred, one-eyed beast named Rufus, had no patience for most folks but tolerated the girl's company. Boone caught her once, curled up beside the dog by the hearth, one thin arm draped across its back, their breathing matched in a kind of weary truce. It stirred something inside him he didn't want to name. He dreamed again that night, the same dream he'd carried for years. The roar of flames, the screaming. His wife, Annabelle, her dark hair soaked with blood, their baby boy clutched to her chest as the raiders dragged them from the cabin. Boone, tied to the post, forced to watch as the house burned, the faces of the men indistinct, more monster than human. He woke before the end, always before the end, slick with sweat and the taste of ash in his mouth. He rose before light, as he did most days, and found Sadie already by the pond, hurling stones into the water. She didn't turn when he approached, just spoke in a tight voice. "You dream bad dreams, too." Boone said nothing. A few hours later, a rider came up the trail from town, dust cloud rising behind him. It was old Nate Price, a livery hand and one of the few men left in Dry Fork with any spine. He pulled up by the fence, his horse lathered and breathing hard. "Boone," he called, voice low and grim. "Thought you ought to hear this." Boone met him at the gate. "Crowder's holding a meeting in the saloon. Words come down from the hills. U.S. Marshals heading this way. Name of Caleb Hartley." Boone felt his gut twist. Hartley. He hadn't heard that name since the war. Nate went on. "Crowder spooked. Wants to send men to gut him before he hits town." Boone leaned against the fence, watching the ducks. "Marshall's a fool for coming." "Maybe," Nate said, "but he's coming anyhow." With that, the man tipped his hat and rode on, leaving a fresh trail of dust behind. Boone didn't say a word to Sadie about it. There was no good in it, but he could feel the air thickening, the land itself tensing like a drawn bow. Later that afternoon, Boone sent Sadie into town for salt and lamp oil. He should have known better, but it was a chore needed doing, and she'd been restless. The town was alive with a strange, angry energy. Crowder's men rode heavy through the streets, rifles across their saddles, eyes sharp for anything out of place. Sadie moved quick, ducking between buildings, keeping her head down. She heard the gathering before she saw it. The jeering voices, the clink of spurs on wood. A small knot of townsfolk stood by the gallows tree, faces pale and resigned. At the center of it, Crowder himself lounged against a post, a smug curl to his lip. They dragged a man out from the jail, scrawny, middle-aged, his shirt torn, blood at his temple. Sadie didn't know him, but it didn't matter. The charge was the same as always: spying, talking to the marshal, thinking himself better than Crowder. "No room in my town for traitors," Crowder announced, loud enough for every ear in Dry Fort to catch it. "Lessons gotta be taught." The rope was already around the man's neck. Sadie felt her stomach turn, bile rising. The man wept, begged, but it was wasted breath. Crowder gave a lazy flick of his hand, and one of his men kicked the crate out from under him. Sadie turned and fled. The image burned into her eyes, the sound of the rope creaking behind her as awful as the silence that followed it. She ran without stopping, breath ragged, boots pounding the dusty trail back to Boone's ranch. Rufus barked once as she came, and Boone was already at the fence by the time she staggered to a stop. "Easy, girl," he muttered, catching her as she nearly collapsed. They hung him," she gasped. "Crowder," he said anybody talks gets strung up too." Boone felt a cold knot settle in his chest. He helped her inside, fetched water, but the words were just a formality now. His mind was already far away, reaching back through years of dust and blood. That name, Caleb Hartley. Boone could see him clear as day, a younger man in a blue coat, eyes sharp and steady, always too damn noble for his own good. They'd served together, killed together, watched men die on fields so red the earth would never forget it. Hartley had pulled Boone from a trench at Shiloh, half dead and mad with fever, and now he was coming here, into Crowder's jaws. Boone sat by the fire that night, sharpening his old knife on a whetstone, the rasp of metal against stone filling the room. Sadie lay curled on the rug beside Rufus, her eyes half closed, but watching. "You gonna stop him?" she asked softly. Boone didn't answer. The wind stirred the curtain, and somewhere out in the dark, an owl called. He thought of Annabelle, of the child, of the years wasted in hiding from a world he once bent to his will. Thought of the town dying under Crowder's thumb, of Hartley riding into a noose. And for the first time in a long while, Boone felt something other than weariness. It was cold, sharp, and familiar. Vengeance. The sun had long since slipped behind the jagged teeth of the western hills, and night stretched thick and heavy over the plains. A thin sliver of moon hung in the sky like a pale scar, offering little light. Boone sat outside the house, the old hound at his feet, a slow fire crackling in a ring of stones. He'd taken to sitting out here most nights now. The quiet company of the land his only comfort. Sadie was inside, tending to a pot of beans, the aroma barely masking the metallic scent of oil from Boone's old Henry rifle, which lay disassembled on the table. It was the sound of a horse first, a dragging, uneven gait, not the steady clip of a rider, but a limping, laboring animal near spent. Boone stood, hand to his sidearm, eyes narrowing into the dark. The figure appeared at the edge of the firelight a moment later. A man slumped in the saddle, coat torn, blood darkening one sleeve and seeping down his side. His face was pale under the grime, a grizzled beard streaked with gray. But Boone knew him the instant their eyes met. "Hell," Boone muttered. "Caleb Hartley." The man slid from the saddle, landing hard on his knees. Boone caught him before he crumpled, easing him down by the fire. "You look like Hammer Death," Boone said. Hartley managed a grim smile, blood flecking his teeth. "I've been better." Sadie appeared in the doorway, eyes wide. Boone waved her inside. "Get water. Clean rags." Without a word, she darted back into the house. Boone crouched by his old comrade, studying the torn flesh, the arrow-shaped wound high in his shoulder. "Crowder's men ambushed us 6 miles north," Hartley rasped. "Had some good men with me. All dead now." Boone worked in silence, slicing away blood-soaked fabric, cleaning the wound. He hadn't set a field dressing since the war, but his hands remembered. Sadie returned, water sloshing in a tin basin, and Boone washed the blood away. the firelight catching the long, jagged scar on Hartley's ribs. "Same old Boone," Hartley muttered. "I figure if I made it this far, you'd finish the job." Boone gave a dry grunt. "Ain't your time yet." For a while, there was only the sound of wind in the grass, the pop of fire, and the quiet hiss of flesh being cleaned. Boone bound the shoulder tight and passed Hartley a tin cup. "Drink." Hartley swallowed hard, then leaned back against a rock, watching Boone through half-lidded eyes. "I heard the stories, you know," he said after a while. "After the war. The devil of Shiloh. Men swore you were dead or gone to hell." "Damn near both," Boone muttered. "You were the best scout I ever saw," Hartley said. "A ghost in the trees. Killed more men than hunger and lead put together. And then you vanished." "Had reason," Boone said. The memory of flames, of Annabelle's scream, was never far. Hartley let out a weary sigh. "I ain't here to drag up ghosts, Boone. I came because this town's choking to death under Crowder's boot, and somebody's got to cut his throat." Boone glanced toward the house, where Sadie watched through the doorway, face pale. "Crowder's got 40 men now," Boone said. "Maybe more." Hartley's face hardened. "And if I told you he plans to wipe out every family still left loyal to the old sheriff by sunrise? Burn him out. Hang the men, take the women." Boone's stomach turned, though his face stayed like stone. "Folks too scared to fight back," Hartley continued. "And Crowder's men, they're worse than animals. I've seen what they did in other towns." Sadie stepped out then, voice small but steady. "You'll stop him, won't you?" Both men looked at her. Boone saw the raw pleading in her face, and more, the spark of a person not ready to give up. "Not yet. Girl," Boone said, voice rough. "This ain't your fight." "It is," she said, stepping closer. "It's mine. It's everybody's. They killed my ma, and Pa took my home. If you don't stop Em, they'll keep doing it to everybody." The fire cast flickering shadows across her face, making her eyes seem too large for her thin, dirt-smudged face. Hartley gave a soft, pained chuckle. "She's got more sand than most men in this place." Boone looked down at the old knife in his hand, its edge catching the light. He remembered the weight of it in other nights, other fields, cutting ropes, throats, and the endless binding of duty. It had been a long, long time since he'd sharpened it. He slid the blade against the whetstone, the rasp loud in the quiet. "Don't know what you're hoping for," Boone muttered. "I ain't a hero. Never was." "Never asked for one," Hartley said, wincing as he adjusted. "Just a killer who remembers how." Sadie knelt by the fire, her small hand resting against Boone's weathered knuckles. "Please." The sound of her voice, not begging, not afraid, but certain, scraped against the walls he'd built for years, and like a thin crack in a dam, it widened. He set the knife down, wiped the edge clean. "Crowder won't see another sunrise," Boone said. Hartley managed a crooked smile. "Knew you were too mean to let a bastard like him win." Boone rose, moved to the corner of the cabin where a bundle lay wrapped in oiled cloth. He undid the bindings, revealing the Henry rifle, the steel barrel still clean, still eager. He ran a palm along the stock, the old weapon as much a part of him as the scars. "You'll be fit to ride?" he asked Hartley. "I'll be there." Boone loaded the rifle, each round sliding home with a click. He glanced once at Sadie. "You stay close. Do as I say. This ain't a clean thing we're gonna do." Sadie nodded, not flinching. The fire hissed as a gust of wind stirred the coals. Boone checked the edge of his knife one final time. "Time to bury some ghosts," he said. The last light of dusk bled from the sky as Boone, Hartley, and Sadie rode the narrow trail into Dry Fork. The town lay ahead, a scatter of shacks and crooked buildings, crouched under the weight of night, lamps flickering in windows, the distant clatter of boots on wood, and drunken laughter drifting from the saloon. Somewhere beyond that, Crowder's men waited, rifles in hand, their cruelty thick in the air. Boone dismounted just past the blacksmith's, signaling Hartley to stay hidden in the shadows of the old livery. Sadie clung to the back of Boone's saddle a moment longer, then slid down. He gave her a nod, his eyes flat and dark as storm water. "Stay low. Do as I showed you." She swallowed hard but nodded. Boone moved like a ghost through the alleys and empty streets, a shadow among shadows. His knife gleamed once in the moonlight, then vanished into the throat of a sentry posted behind the mercantile. The man hit the ground without a sound. Boone stripped the rifle from his grasp and slipped further into town. In another life, he'd done this too often, behind enemy lines, one against many. A long knife and steady hands all he needed. The Devil of Shiloh, they'd called him. Tonight, the name fit again. Crowder's men never saw it coming. One by one, they fell. A shot from the dark, a tripwire rigged across a side alley, a boot knife buried to the hilt. Boone's work was ruthless and quiet, blood soaking into the dust, the bodies vanishing into shadow. At the far edge of town, Hartley limped into position behind an overturned wagon, his carbine leveled. When Boone's first shot cracked from the bell tower, Hartley opened up, his bullets finding their marks in the confused mass of outlaws pouring into the street. And then the townsfolk rose. Nate Price, the liveryman, came out swinging an axe. Old Sarah Kinney fired a scattergun from her porch, dropping 2 of Crowder's men in the dirt. A young farmhand hurled a lantern onto the front steps of the jail, flames licking upward. Years of fear cracked in a single, ragged heartbeat. Dry Fork fought back. By the time Boone stepped through the swinging doors of the saloon, only a handful of Crowder's men remained, and most of them were bleeding. The room stank of sweat, spilled whiskey, and death. Crowder stood at the far end, leaning against the bar, a revolver in one hand, a cruel grin cutting his face. Behind him, a trembling young girl from town huddled against the wall, her eyes wide with terror. "Well now," Crowder drawled, lifting his glass in mock salute. "Ain't this a sight? The ghost of old Boone himself. Come to dance at my wake." Boone said nothing. He crossed the floor with slow, steady steps, the worn grip of his long-forgotten Colt already loose in its holster. Crowder laughed. "You left this world years ago, Boone. Tucked your tail, drank yourself into a grave nobody wanted. You think one old killer's gonna stop what I built here?" "You'll die slow," Boone said quietly. "I promise you that." Crowder's grin widened. "Before you try, maybe I'll carve a message in that little girl of yours. Teach you what happens to those that cross me." He barely finished the sentence before Boone moved. The draw was so fast the room seemed to shudder with it. A single shot roared, and Crowder's smirk died in an instant. The bullet took him just beneath the eye, dropping him to the floor like a marionette with cut strings. For a long moment, the saloon held its breath. Then Sadie appeared in the doorway, breath ragged, a long-handled kitchen knife clutched in both hands. Boone turned, meeting her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. It was over. By dawn, the streets of Dry Fork lay quiet. The dead were gathered, the wounded tended. Smoke curled from the still smoldering jail, and the townsfolk moved like people waking from a long, black sleep. Boone stood by his horse, tightening the saddle straps. Hartley approached, his arm in a sling, a grim satisfaction in his bloodshot eyes. "Could have used you years ago," the marshal said. "Hell of a thing you did here." Boone shrugged. "Didn't do it for the town." He swung into the saddle. The wind carried the scent of sage and dust. Sadie appeared at his stirrup, face smudged, hair tangled, but a new steadiness in her eyes. "You leaving?" she asked. Boone nodded. "You coming back? World don't leave much room for folks like me." Sadie hesitated, then squared her shoulders, looking up at him like she wasn't a child anymore. "Pa," she said. The word was small, but it hit like a hammer. Boone's throat worked around something too rough to swallow. He reached down, brushed a hand through her wild hair. "Take care of Hartley. He's got use for fighters." Sadie nodded, blinking fast. Boone turned the horse toward the rising sun, its light just spilling over the hills, painting the town gold. Behind him, Dry Fork was different now, a place no longer ruled by fear. And as he rode, the old name clung to him again, whispered like a legend the wind wouldn't let die. The Devil of Shiloh, riding west.